So how did I lose 50 pounds in just 3 months? That's right, I lost 50 pounds in 90 days. How did I do that? Well, the short answer is I maintained a caloric deficit over an extended period of time that led to a reduction in weight. That's the simple answer. That's how that worked. But how did I do that? What choices did I make? What habits did I break? What actions did I take that allowed me to maintain that caloric deficit over that extended period of time and lose 50 pounds in just 90 days? That is what I want to talk about today on the 12-week update of Losing It 2025. Okay, so first of all, what choices did I make that led to this weight loss? Now, John Maxwell, the leadership guru extraordinaire, has said that life is a matter of choices, and every choice you make makes you. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And so as I think about the choices that I made, there are 3 or 4 choices that stand out to me in particular. The first choice I made is that I chose to be dissatisfied with my present situation. I was not feeling good. I had stepped on the scale and weighed over 335 pounds. That was way more than I wanted to weigh. My clothes didn't fit anymore. It was affecting my relationships because you realize when you're not happy with yourself, it's hard to be happy with anybody else, right? So I was grumpy. I would get hangry. I just was not feeling good. And then add to all of those things the reality that I was facing some chronic health conditions like hypertension and type 2 diabetes, just to name a couple. And I recognized that I was not satisfied with that. There were a lot of things that came together to lead to a level of dissatisfaction with the status quo that was sufficient to move me to action, because a lot of those things had been around for some time. Some of them were new, some of them had been there for a while, but were getting worse. But the reality was I could see that I was headed down a path that ultimately was going to lead to my destruction. And ultimately, I recognized that if I didn't change, I was as good as done. And so I chose to not be satisfied with that. I chose to not accept it. I chose to care enough about my own health and well-being to actually do some difficult things. And the first of those difficult things that I did was I chose to reflect on my own behaviors and to evaluate my habits and then begin to research various alternatives, other things that I could do instead of the things that I was doing that would ultimately lead me to a better life and a better state of being. And then the third thing that I chose to do was I chose to embrace the reality that change was actually possible. That it was actually possible, that it was something that I could actually accomplish if indeed I set my mind to it and took action to move in that direction. And the fourth thing that I chose to do was I chose to set some smart goals. I chose to follow a specific set of planning steps that helped me to set some goals that would lead me to where I wanted to be. Those are some of the things that I want to talk to you about in a little bit more detail. So again, going back just a moment to kind of recap what I've shared so far. My first choice was to choose to be dissatisfied with the reality of my situation. My clothes weren't fitting anymore. It took forever to get ready to go anywhere because nothing would fit. I'd go through the closet, I'd have all these clean clothes, but I couldn't wear any of them. I'd put on one after the other, and I'd find that each one made me look fatter than the one before. And I had very few articles of clothing at that point that I could actually wear. And that was hard. I imagine that if you struggle with your weight the way that I did, you've experienced that as well. As I mentioned, my relationships were impacted. If you're not happy with yourself, you're not going to be happy with other people around you, which makes them unhappy with you because you can be difficult to live with. I didn't feel good. Everything was difficult. Tying my shoes was difficult. Clipping my toenails was difficult, for goodness sakes. I mean, certain things that you expect to be able to do for yourself had become difficult to do. Going upstairs was no longer easy. It was difficult. I would get winded going up a single flight of stairs. And I was just no longer willing to accept that. I was, as I said, developing chronic health problems that required ongoing medication. And then I think one of the things that really sealed the deal for me was I saw a picture on Facebook of a friend of mine who also had type 2 diabetes, who had lost a portion of his foot. They'd had to surgically remove about half of his foot. And I realized that if I didn't change, that could very well be my future. And it was a future that I was not willing to accept. So again, step one was to choose to become dissatisfied with the status quo. Choose to become dissatisfied with your current state of being if you want to change. That's what I had to do. The second thing that I had to choose was I had to choose to reflect on my own behaviors, to evaluate my habits, to ask what, when, and why I was eating. So let's answer those questions. What was I eating? I was eating what is referred to by Dr. Michael Greger as a SAD diet. SAD. It's a very telling phrase that you are eating a SAD diet. It stands for the Standard American Diet. That's what I was eating, the Standard American Diet. And honestly, it was just sad. I was eating fast food all the time. I was eating sandwiches. I was eating pizza, tacos, burgers, fries, chips, things that were convenient, things that were hyper palatable and that had very little nutritional value, but were packed with sugar and fat and simple carbs and just all of these terrible things that were making me feel bloated and unhealthy. And I was just piling on the weight. And the scale just kept going up and up and up, and there was no end in sight. If I had kept going in that direction, I would probably be over 350 pounds by now, easily. So that's what I was eating. When was I eating? Interestingly enough, I think most of the problematic eating that I was engaged in was in the late afternoon and evening. During the day when I was at work, I would manage pretty well. I would, have a light breakfast, sometimes even a smoothie or a bowl of cereal, or maybe nothing at all. And at lunch, I would have whatever I had packed or brought with me, or maybe I'd have lunch at the school cafeteria. But then when I would get off work, that's when the real trouble would start, you see, because on the way home, I'd be hungry and I'd think to myself, well, I know we're going to have dinner later, but there's a Taco Bell right there. That sounds really good. I think I'll just slip in. I won't even say anything to my wife or anybody else. I'll just have, some Taco Bell, and I would have, 1,300 calories worth of fast food tacos and burritos and then still have dinner when I got home. And then later that night, after everybody else was in bed, I'd have a couple of sandwiches. I mean, I was gluttonous. I was just eating all the time when I would get home from work. So for me, what I was eating was all of this bad stuff. And when I was eating was probably the worst possible time that you could eat, which was late at night, just before I'd go to bed. And of course, having eaten most of the afternoon there as well. So that begs the question, why was I eating? Well, I was eating because I was bored. I was eating because I was tired. I was eating when I was happy. I was eating when I was sad. If I was lonely, or if I was resentful about something, or if I was angry about something. Some people get upset and they lose their appetite, not me. I would get upset and my appetite would just explode. And so for me, I was an emotional eater, but I was also a habitual eater. And I was someone who would eat out of boredom, right? And I would begin eating, and if it tasted good, it wouldn't matter if I was hungry or not anymore. I would just keep on eating and eating and eating. And I would eat mindlessly. I wouldn't pour some chips into a bowl. I would just sit down with the bag. I would, take stacks of cookies rather than just a couple of cookies. Portion control was out the window. Seconds were normal. Thirds were definitely optionable. I was eating way too much food. I was eating the wrong foods at the wrong times for the wrong reasons. And I needed to recognize that. So I chose to be dissatisfied with my current situation, and I chose to answer some hard questions. And having done that, I then had to choose to believe that it was possible to change. I had to believe that change was a possibility, that I wasn't doomed to stay in the situation that I was in, that I could take action that maintained and sustained over an extended period of time would result in the changes that I wanted to see. One of the books that I read early on, in fact, I read it a couple of years ago and learned a lot from it. But one of the books that really helped me come to that understanding and to choose to believe that change was possible was a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And I encourage you to check that out, especially if you're trying to change something in your life. One of the points that she makes is that there are two different types of thinking. There is a fixed mindset and there is a growth mindset. A fixed mindset says, this is how I am, this is how I have always been, and this is how I will always be. A fixed mindset does not recognize its own capability to change. A growth mindset, on the other hand, recognizes that with different inputs, you can get different outcomes, that you can grow, develop, and change if you do the things that are necessary, if you put in the work. And so I chose to have a growth mindset as it pertained to my own health, and to believe that I could, in fact, affect change in my life. Having accepted that growth mindset, I then had to begin to gather and evaluate information and ideas about how I could change my diet in order to change my life and to become the healthier person that I wanted to be. Ultimately, I found answers through talking with my wife, who happens to be a certified health and wellness coach, which, hey, how awesome is that to have a certified health and wellness coach, in the home that I could ask for help. She's tried to get me to make these changes for a very, very long time. And I owe a debt of gratitude to her, both for her patience and for her insights and for her help and suggestions along the way. And once I finally decided to listen to her suggestions, I've had some amazing results. So thank you. I appreciate that. So that was a huge help. Another thing that really helped was finding some of those answers through some of the books that I was reading, like How Not to Die and How Not to Diet by Michael Greger. Also, by Dr. Michael Greger, I should say. Reading books like Atomic Habits and The Power of Habit really helped me think about how I could impact behavioral change. And then there were a number of documentaries that I watched as well. Things like That Sugar Film and Forks Over Knives and Game Changers were some very instrumental documentaries that, watching those with my wife and evaluating those and thinking about the arguments that they were making for a whole food plant-based diet, those things together helped me to develop a plan for how to approach the dietary changes that I needed to make. So again, I chose to be dissatisfied with the status quo. I chose to reflect on my behaviors, and I chose to believe that change was possible, and then to seek out the methods that I could employ that would assist me to make the changes that I needed to make. And then fourth, I chose to set some SMART goals. So what do I mean by SMART goals? Well, it's an acrostic, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. It's one thing to say, I need to lose some weight. Well, yeah, I need to lose some weight. But if you don't have a plan on how to go about losing the weight, then really you're just making a wish, not setting a goal. And so using SMART goals can help you chart a course that will help you get from point A to point B. So the first thing is you need to make a specific goal. It wasn't enough for me to say I need to lose weight. I needed to be specific. And for me, that number was 100 pounds. Now, if we're being honest, I need to lose more than 100 pounds. I probably need to lose about 125 or 130 pounds to get to the weight that I ultimately want to be at. But I felt like 100 pounds was a good, solid number that I could really set my focus on and that I could work towards as part of my New Year's resolution for 2025. So I chose to set the goal of losing 100 pounds. It was specific. The next thing was it measurable? And what method of measurement would I use to determine whether or not I was making progress toward that goal? Well, certainly your weight as a number, as a piece of data, is very measurable. And to measure that, I decided to weigh myself every day. I have a Renpho scale that I use that measures not only my weight, but also my body fat and my hydration and a lot of other things. I get a lot of data from that Renpho scale. And if you don't have a smart scale, I would encourage you, if you're serious about losing weight, to maybe invest in one. There's a link in the description below where you can get the affiliate. No, there's not. I'm not selling anything. Honestly, I'm not selling anything. So no affiliate marketing going on here. But for me, it was Renpho. There are other brands out there. I don't know what they are, but that's the one that I have. That's the one that I used. And the data that I get from that really helps me to maintain accurate measurements so that I can make sure not only that I'm losing weight, but that I'm doing it in a healthy way in terms of my whole body makeup. So I set a specific goal, 100 pounds, and I made it measurable, and I measured it by establishing the habit of weighing myself every day. The third thing, SMA, is that your goal should be achievable. You want to set a realistic goal, right? And so I decided that I wanted to set that goal of losing, 100 pounds, but I gave myself a reasonable amount of time to do it. It's achievable. I wasn't expecting to lose 100 pounds in 3 months, right? I was expecting to lose 100 pounds over the course of a whole year. So yes, it's achievable. In fact, over the course of a year, to lose 100 pounds, if I were really to take my time about it, I would only have to lose about 1.92 pounds per week. That's it. And that's a very healthy rate at which to lose weight. So this was definitely an achievable goal. It was specific, it was measurable, it was achievable. Now, the next question is it relevant? Is it a relevant goal? Well, I talked about the reasons that I was dissatisfied were my health, my overall well-being, my sense of myself, right? Being able to fit into the clothes that I wanted to wear and being happy with myself in that situation. Getting my chronic health conditions like hypertension and type 2 diabetes under control. Every single one of those things is positively impacted by losing weight. So that is, in fact, a relevant goal to my current situation. And lastly, is it timely? In other words, you can't just have an open-ended goal of just saying, yeah, I want to lose weight. I'm going to lose 100 pounds eventually. When are you going to start? Oh, I'm going to start sometime. So no, I didn't do that. I actually started planning for this in November of last year. I realized that I needed to make a change, but I knew that I needed to plan for that change. I knew that I needed to do research. I knew that I needed to come up with sort of a whole grand scheme in my own mind, at least, of how I was going to approach this. And so I began planning, right? I began planning. And I set a start date of January 1st. I thought, New Year's resolution, 2025, I'm going to lose 100 pounds in 2025. And you know what? It was a timely goal. My goal was to start on January 1st and to achieve my goal before the end of the year. Now, did I expect that I was going to be 50+% of the way to my goal at the 3-month mark? I am 50% of the way to my goal in only 25% of the year. So did I expect that to happen that quickly? Absolutely not. I did not expect to lose this much weight this quickly. Okay, I did not. Some of this is a surprise to me. Some of it came as a real big surprise. But anyway, I chose to set SMART goals. I chose specific goals, measurable goals, achievable goals, relevant goals, timely goals, and then I began the process. I didn't put it off. I started right away. Now, another thing I want to say about goals, one of the more important things that I chose to focus on was not the end result, but rather the process that I would take in order to get to that end result. I didn't just say, I want to lose 100 pounds in 2025. I asked myself, what can I do to lose 100 pounds in 2025? And the number one area that I could change in order to achieve those weight loss goals was to change my diet. Now, some people would say, well, yeah, there's exercise and there are all these other things. That's true. All of that's true. All of those are great. But the number one thing that I could do to accomplish the goals that I'd set for myself was to change my diet. I love what Dr. Michael Greger says in his book, How Not to Die. He says, you cannot outrun a bad diet, right? No matter how much you exercise, if you're eating terribly, it's gonna catch up with you at some point. And my life had been evidence of that up to this point. So I chose to focus not on the outcome goals, but on the input goals. Not on where I wanted to be, but on the process that I needed to take in order to get there. So I focused on changing my diet, on eliminating meats, eliminating dairy, eliminating highly refined and processed sugars and oils, eliminating or at least limiting to a great extent highly processed foods, and shifting more towards a whole food diet. Now, I say plant-based rather than vegan because the reality is you can eat a vegan diet and gain weight. You could eat a plant-based diet, I suppose, and gain weight if you ate enough of the wrong kinds of things. But a vegan diet, you can eat Oreos all day long and say that you're vegan because Oreos have no animal product in them, right? That was not what I didn't just want to be quote unquote vegan. I wanted to eat foods that were going to bring nutrition to my body and that were going to help me along the way. Okay. So I've talked about some of the choices that I had to make. And I want to talk briefly, very briefly, about some of the habits that I had to break. I actually referenced them before. I was eating a sad diet. I needed to change that. I was eating late at night. I needed to change that. I was eating emotionally for the wrong reasons. I needed to change that, right? So binge eating late at night was one of the habits that I needed to break. Emotional, mindless eating without paying attention to what I was putting into my body, those were some of the habits that I needed to break. And so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about those because I think they're fairly self-explanatory and I think I've sort of already addressed them. But what were some of the actions that I needed to take in order to break those habits, having made those choices? Well, the first thing was I needed to change from a sad diet to a plant-based diet, a whole foods diet. And I decided that I was going to do that for a minimum of 90 days before changing course. Now, I wanted to give my system time to adjust and to respond to the new way of eating before giving up or becoming discouraged and changing course to try something else. 90 days seemed like an appropriate time frame based on my wife's advice, based on my own previous experience, based on the things that I had read in Dr. Greger's books. It seemed like the best plan. And so the first thing I did was I changed from a standard American diet to a whole foods plant-based diet. The next thing that I needed to do was establish methods of tracking and gathering data. I already talked to you about the Renfo scale that I use to weigh myself every day, but there's another habit that I needed to form that would also give me additional data and help me to be more mindful about the foods that I was putting into my body, what I was eating and when I was eating, so that I could be more aware of why I was eating. So I downloaded an app called MyFitnessPal. You've probably heard of it. There are lots of great ones out there. Noom is a really good one. MyFitnessPal is fantastic. Most of them have free versions that will help you with some of the basic stuff. I chose to go ahead and purchase the premium version so that I could get all the bells and whistles and all the features, because I wanted to make an investment in my own success. So I downloaded that app and I began to log my meals so that I could develop mindfulness regarding the things that I was putting into my body, so that I could make sure that I was eating the right things at the right times. I focused on a couple of different things. Number one, I focused on maintaining a caloric deficit, so tracking my food and logging every single meal that I put in there, sometimes even measuring it on a digital scale or using portion control, by using measuring cups and things like that. I began to think about what I was eating. And one of the tools I used was MyFitnessPal. Additionally, using a food tracking app like this allowed me not only to maintain my caloric deficit, but it also helped me to pay special attention to my macros, to make sure that I was getting the appropriate amount of carbohydrates and as little fat or as much fat as I thought I needed, or as my plan indicated that I needed, and then also adequate protein. And so, I would adjust what I would eat in a given day based on what I was seeing on that macro tracking. And one of the best things that I found that I could do was, if I was low in one or the other areas, I could I could put together a smoothie in the blender to get more protein, or to put a little more fat in the diet, or do whatever I needed to do, right? So I switched from a SAD diet to a whole food plant-based diet. I began to track my meals and the foods that I was eating using MyFitnessPal, and to track my weight using the Renfo scale. And I began then to take that data and look at it on a daily, and really especially on a weekly basis, to evaluate my progress. I would compare the data sets that I had gathered each week and consider it, and then make adjustments to it as needed. Making weekly videos like the one that I'm making right now were the occasion for that reflection, and served as a source of accountability for me. So thank you for that. I appreciate you being here. So the next thing that I focused on, in addition to being on a whole food plant-based diet, tracking my food, tracking my weight, evaluating and assessing and reflecting upon that in order to make any necessary changes on a weekly basis, making videos on a weekly basis to hold myself accountable. In addition to all of those things, I also focused on some keystone habits. Now, if you've read The Power of Habit, or if you've read Atomic Habits, then you know that there's a thing called the habit loop. There's a trigger. That trigger initiates a response, and that response, or that pattern of behavior, ultimately leads to a reward. And if you want to change the outcome, you need to change the behavior that is triggered. So one of the triggers that I had was the desire to eat something flavorful and yummy late at night when everybody else was in bed. I'd be alone, maybe I'd be lonely, maybe I'd be sad, maybe I'd be bored, whatever the case might be. That was the trigger to go ahead and grab a snack, which usually would be a sandwich or a sandwich and a half and a bag of chips, and if you understand what I'm saying. And so I knew that the trigger itself was not going away. And so I needed to program a different response to that trigger that would still lead to the flavorful reward. And so I found a type of tea that I really liked. It has no sugar, no calories in it. It's called Cinnamon Sunset Tea, comes in a little metal tin. The thing I liked about it is it had a very strong cinnamon flavor, and it was even a little spicy, a little bit hot. And that combination really activated my taste buds. And it was warm, and there was a process involved in making it, so there was a little ritual there. And so whenever I would feel the urge to have that binge late at night, I would, instead of making a sandwich, make a cup of tea. And it was hot, so I couldn't drink it fast. I had to drink it slowly. And if I needed a second one, I could have a second one. That was fine because there were no calories in it. It was just extra hydration. And so that tea was strong enough in flavor and took me long enough to drink that it satisfied the boredom. And it was flavorful enough that it satisfied my desire for something tangy or something spicy or something flavorful. And so I was able to eliminate hundreds, if not thousands of calories from my diet simply by changing this one keystone habit that then would impact other habits as well. Another thing that I did is I identified old staples in my diet, things like turkey sandwiches and chips and Taco Bell, and I replaced them with new, healthier staples like beans and rice and chickpeas and potatoes and roasted vegetables and so much more, smoothies, oatmeal, and the list goes on of things that I have replaced my old choices with that are very satisfying and that I've learned to absolutely love and enjoy. 50 pounds in 90 days, I'll say it one last time, and that's the last time I'm going to say it in this video. But by making those choices, by breaking those habits, by taking those actions, and by maintaining consistency over the last 3 months, I was able to achieve my goals. What goals are you trying to achieve? What are some choices that you need to make? What are some habits that you need to break? What are some actions that you need to take in order to achieve your goals? Let me know in the comments so that I can pray for you and encourage you on your journey. And stay tuned to see what happens next on mine. Thanks for joining me. Have a blessed day.